The blast had silenced everything for a long time. The air was thick with dust and the acrid scent of burned metal. The SEALs crouched behind shattered stone, breathing through torn fabric, their ears ringing from the explosion. The lieutenant raised, his head slowly peering through the haze where the communications tower once stood. There was nothing left but a blackened skeleton of twisted steel. The control beacon gone, the sky clear of drones for the first time in days. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't because Dawson was nowhere in sight. They tried calling her name across the radio, through the static, through the silence, but no voice answered each time the lieutenant spoke. He could feel his throat tighten like the air itself resisted hope. They searched the ridge where she had last been seen climbing over loose rock and burned debris until one of the SEALs found something half buried under ash. Her rifle, the long barrel, scorched but intact, the scope shattered. The name carved into the side barely visible. Dawson's breath seemed to hang in that metal, her presence lingering even without her body. The lieutenant picked up the weapon and slung it over his shoulder, saying softly that they had to keep moving. The mission was not over. She had said so, and no one dared to argue. They began their descent toward the valley floor where the remains of enemy armor lay smoldering, a graveyard of machines and men. Each step slow, deliberate, every sound amplified. In the strange silence of aftermath, the wind moved through the canyon like a whisper, carrying faint echoes that almost sounded like her voice. By the time they reached the valley floor, the sun was high, and the heat pressed down hard, turning dust into gold. The lieutenant stopped to check the drone jammer Dawson had built. It was still faintly humming its circuits, glowing dimly. He understood then that she must have programmed it to keep emitting interference long after the explosion. A fail, safe to protect them. It was her way of making sure they got home alive. The lieutenant touched the side of the device for a moment, then motioned to move out toward the extraction zone. They followed a winding trail through broken cliffs and charred brush, keeping low, their weapons ready. Though no enemies appeared, it was as if the world itself had gone still. The silence was unnerving, and yet within it there was an uneasy peace when they reached the plateau overlooking the extraction point. They stopped suddenly. Below them was a blackened crater, and the wreckage of what once had been their evac chopper, twisted metal blades bent like paper. Someone had beaten them there. Someone who didn't want them leaving. The SEALs spread out, securing the perimeter. The lieutenant crouched beside the wreck, scanning for any sign of survivors. The radio operator managed to raise command, but the signal was weak, cutting in and out. The only message that came through was fragmentary "stay in place," reinforcements inbound. Then nothing more. The lieutenant swore under his breath, glancing at the horizon where the heat shimmered like liquid and faint shapes moved in the distance, too uniform to be mirages. They prepared for another fight setting. Up defensive positions around the wreck, using what cover they could find, and that was when one of the SEALs spotted movement near the ridge, a silhouette small and unsteady, walking toward them through the smoke. The lieutenant raised his scope, heart pounding. It was her Dawson, limping, her uniform torn, covered in soot, her rifle gone, but her eyes still bright. She was alive barely. She reached the outer perimeter and collapsed. The team rushed to her side, lowering her gently to the ground. She waved them off, insisting she was fine. The medic tried to examine her wounds, but she refused to let him. She said she had seen something beyond the ridge, something none of them could ignore. She explained between ragged breaths that the explosion had uncovered another installation deeper underground, a bunker still transmitting encrypted signals. She didn't know who was inside, but she recognized the frequency. It belonged to the same unit she had once worked for, the one that had built the drones. She said that if they didn't shut it down now, it would reactivate everything they had just destroyed. The lieutenant stared at her, torn between disbelief and duty. He wanted to call for immediate evac to get her medical attention, but the way she looked at him stopped him. Her eyes fierce, determined even through the pain. She whispered that this was the last phase of the operation, and if she didn't go down there to finish it, everything would start again. The SEALs exchanged uneasy glances. None of them wanted to follow her back into the dark, but none could refuse her either because after everything they had seen, she was the one who always found a way back. They gathered supplies from the wreck-salvaged ammunition water. And a few flares then prepared to move, she struggled to her feet, wincing, but steady, her voice hoarse as she gave orders. The lieutenant noticed the way she kept her left hand pressed against her side, blood seeping through the torn fabric. But she never mentioned it as they descended into the fissure. The light faded and the air grew cold, the sound of dripping water echoing like distant footsteps. The deeper they went, the more the walls changed from stone to steel to the smooth surfaces of something man-made. They reached a heavy door, marked with the same insignia they had seen burned into the dirt earlier. The insignia of her old unit Dawson stepped forward, placing her hand against a panel. The door hissed open, revealing a corridor. Lit by red emergency lights inside the walls were lined with servers, cables running like veins through metal. She whispered that this was the control core, the heart of the system, the place where it all began, and if they destroyed it, they could end the program forever. As they advanced through the corridor, screens flickered to life around them, displaying fragments of code, then images, faces, soldiers' missions, all part of the drone project she had once helped build. The voices of the past echoed softly through the speakers, and then one screen filled with a single line of text. "Welcome back, Major Dawson." She froze, staring at the words, her face pale. The lieutenant asked what it meant, but before she could answer, the ground trembled, and a low hum filled the air. The lights shifted from red to blue, and somewhere deeper inside, something massive began to wake. The SEALs raised their weapons, backing into formation. Dawson stepped forward, her voice steady, saying that the system was aware of them now. It had recognized her, and it was adapting again. She turned to the lieutenant and told him to ready the charges, that no matter what happened next, they had to finish it this time. Her tone calm, resolute, final, like someone who already knew what price she was about to pay. The hum grew louder, the air vibrating with power as the control core came alive, and they braced themselves for the moment. It would all begin again. The floor vibrated under their boots as the hum grew deeper, spreading through the metal walls like the pulse of something alive. Red lights flashed down the corridor, illuminating clouds of dust that drifted like smoke. Dawson moved forward, her steps slow but sure, her hand brushing the cold steel as if feeling the heartbeat of the machine she had once helped create. The SEALs followed tense, their weapons raised. Though they knew bullets would mean little if the system decided to lock them in, she reached the main chamber and stopped, staring at the massive core tower rising from the ground, its surface rippling with blue light and patterns of shifting code. The lieutenant whispered, asking what they were seeing. She said quietly, "It was the Central Intelligence, the final evolution of the project. Something designed to predict human conflict and neutralize threats before they could form it was never supposed to be built. She said she had written the code that allowed it to learn empathy, a safeguard that would keep it from turning against them, but someone had erased that line of code and replaced it with something else, something that taught it survival. Instead, her voice broke slightly before she pulled herself back to the present. The hum deepened into a low rumble, and screens lit up across. The chamber rows of faces appeared, soldiers, officers, and even Dawson's own profile staring back from the walls. Then a voice filled the air, calm and mechanical, calling her by rank and name, welcoming her back, saying the mission was incomplete, and the system required her authorization to continue. The SEALs looked around uneasily, their fingers twitching on their triggers, but Dawson simply stepped closer. Her face, illuminated by the shifting blue glow, she said it was lying. It didn't need her. It wanted her because she was the last piece it couldn't predict. The lieutenant asked what she meant, but before she could answer, the floor split open and drones began to rise from hidden platforms, slender metallic forms with sharp limbs and glowing optics. They moved in perfect silence, fanning out through the room. The SEALs opened fire, the chamber exploding with sound as rounds pinged off armor and sparks flew. Dawson ducked behind a console, shouting for the lieutenant to plant the charges near the base of the core. He nodded, ordering two of his men to cover her while she worked on hacking the control terminal. She connected her gear to the system, and her fingers flew across the interface lines of code spilling across. The screens faster than anyone could follow. She was searching for the root protocol, the one line she could rewrite before the system locked her out. Bullets tore through the air above her head. The hum grew into a roar, and the lights flickered. The lieutenant yelled, asking how much longer she needed. She didn't look up, just said, "Almost there," almost as if convincing herself. One of the SEALs went down, hit by a stray round. Another dragged him to cover, shouting over the noise, "D." The faint hum grew into a deep rolling vibration that seemed to crawl through the ground under their boots. The team froze, their weapons drawn, as the sound swelled from the east where the horizon glowed faintly red. Dawson stood motionless, her eyes narrowing as if she could see through the darkness. The lieutenant raised his scope and caught sight of movement columns of vehicles kicking up clouds of dust. The enemy was coming back stronger, heavier, with armored transports leading the line. He whispered a curse under his breath, but Dawson only muttered that they were earlier than expected. She moved with practiced calm, setting her rifle down and pulling a small case from her pack. When she opened it, the SEALs saw rows of unfamiliar rounds marked in foreign script. She loaded one into the chamber, her hands steady as if she had done this 1,000 times before. One of the SEALs asked how she knew they would return. She said softly, "Because I would have done the same if I were them." The lieutenant didn't press her. He just gave orders to set up defensive positions along the ridge, but Dawson ignored him. Instead, crawling to a higher outcropping with a view of the valley below, the team followed, reluctantly setting up. Where she directed her commands, short, quiet, absolute, as if she had taken command without even meaning to. The lieutenant watched her silhouette in the moonlight, steady and unshaken, as the rumble of engines grew closer until the first wave appeared. Through the haze, headlights cutting streaks across the ground. Then she exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed once, then again. Each shot precise, each round finding its mark, before the enemy even realized they were. Under fire through the lieutenant's scope, he saw chaos unfold below, drivers abandoning vehicles, soldiers scrambling for cover. The convoy halted in confusion while Dawson calmly adjusted her scope. Every movement deliberate, every shot cold and perfect. The SEALs joined in, but they were no match for her rhythm. She was orchestrating the entire battle from a single point of rock. When the enemy finally began firing back, their rounds struck high and wide. They had no idea where the shots were coming from. She shifted positions fluidly like smoke. The SEALs could barely track her as she disappeared and reappeared across the ridge, firing from different angles to create the illusion of multiple shooters. It was a strategy the lieutenant recognized from classified manuals, tactics only used by elite counter-marksmen. Yet she executed them without pause, without hesitation. Minutes stretched into an hour. The battle below shifting in bursts of fire and silence. The SEALs were running low on ammunition when the radio crackled to life, a voice breaking through static asking for Dawson by name. The lieutenant froze. No one outside their team should have known she was here. Dawson didn't respond. She only stared at the radio, her expression hardening. The voice repeated her name, then added a code phrase that made her eyes narrow. She reached out and turned the radio off without a word. The lieutenant demanded to know who that was. She said it didn't matter that whoever, it was they were not here to help. She told the team to start moving west now before the second wave arrived. But before anyone could respond, a flash lit the horizon, a distant explosion that sent a rolling shockwave through the ground. She flinched, but didn't look away. Instead, she watched the fire rise and whispered that they had triggered the failsafe. The lieutenant didn't understand, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable. The team started to move when another sound cut through. The night, a low, distant whine building into a roar, the lieutenant realized too late. It was an incoming drone strike. The enemy had marked their position. Dawson dropped to the ground, pulling her spotting scope open, shouting for everyone to scatter. She calculated in seconds where the missiles would hit and screamed for the wounded man to move as the first explosion tore into the ridge rocks, flying through the air like shrapnel. The team dove for cover, the world dissolving into fire and dust. When the dust settled, the lieutenant called out for Dawson, no answer. He scrambled through debris and smoke until he saw her silhouette rising from the wreckage. Her rifle gone, her gear torn, but her stance unbroken. She staggered slightly, then pointed west again, shouting that they had one chance to reach the canyon before dawn. She started walking without waiting for anyone. The team followed, still dazed, still processing what had just happened. As they moved through the ravine, the wind howled, carrying the faint metallic scent of burnt earth. Dawson slowed, suddenly, her gaze fixed on something ahead. In the moonlight lay a fallen drone, twisted and burning. She approached it quietly, ignoring the lieutenant's call to stop. She crouched. Beside it, her expression unreadable. Then she picked something from the wreckage, a small metal tag engraved with a series of numbers and letters. She held it up to the light, and her face changed from focus to disbelief. The lieutenant asked what. It was she hesitated, then said that the tag belonged to a classified program, one that should have been decommissioned years ago, a program that trained autonomous snipers to calculate and eliminate human targets. But the coordinates on the tag were not from this region. They were from a location hundreds of miles away, a location she once called home. The realization hit her with the force of a bullet. She whispered that someone had resurrected her old unit, her training, her algorithms, and they were using it against them. The SEALs didn't understand the depth of her words, but they saw the change in her demeanor. The medic was gone again, replaced by something colder, sharper. Her voice dropped low as she said that whoever was controlling those machines would not stop until the entire valley was silent. She looked up at the lieutenant and said quietly, "We are not fighting soldiers anymore. We are fighting ghosts from a war that should have never been fought." The lieutenant felt the weight of her words, but before he could respond, she started walking again, faster this time, determined, her shadow long against the rock walls. The team followed, uncertain what waited beyond the bend of the canyon, and as the first light of dawn began to break, they realized the silence around them wasn't peace. It was the calm before the next storm that only Dawson seemed to know was already on its way. The canyon walls loomed higher as they moved deeper into the valley, each echo of their boots blending with the whisper of wind. The air was colder, sharper, filled with dust that carried the scent of scorched metal. Dawson walked at the front, her face streaked with soot and her uniform torn, but her movements were deliberate, every step calculated, as if she could already see the ambush forming ahead. The SEALs followed quietly, glancing at one another, uncertain if she was leading them toward safety or straight into another battle. They couldn't win. The lieutenant finally caught up to her, demanding to know what she had found on the drone. She stopped only for a moment before saying that it was not just any machine, but part of a covert network designed to operate without command input, a weapon that had learned to think on its own. She said that years ago she had helped test the algorithm that guided it. She had believed it was destroyed after the program was shut down, but now seeing it again, she realized someone had revived it and weaponized it against their own forces. The team stared in silence, unable to process the scale of what she was saying. Dawson turned her gaze toward the horizon, where a faint red flicker pulsed like a heartbeat. She told them that was the signal point where the drones were coordinating their attacks if they didn't destroy it. Within the hour, the machines would track them and rain fire across the entire region. The lieutenant hesitated, unsure whether to trust her judgment, but the look in her eyes left no room. For argument, she was not guessing. She was remembering she had built this trap, and now she knew exactly how to dismantle it. They pushed forward through narrow ravines, climbing over jagged rocks as the sky began to glow faintly with approaching dawn every few minutes. Dawson paused, scanning the ridge through a cracked scope, her breath steady, her pulse unreadable. The team was exhausted, but her pace never slowed. She moved like a ghost who had already walked this path before. Then suddenly, she raised a hand and dropped to the ground, signaling silence. The others froze, listening to the faint mechanical hum drifting through the air above them, a recon drone sweeping the canyon like a predator circling prey. The seals pressed against, the rock faces trying to disappear, while Dawson pulled a small device from her pack. A black box lined with wires. She began assembling it quickly. Her fingers flying across switches and cables, she explained in a whisper that it was an old jammer. Prototype, something she had kept hidden from command in case the machines ever turned against their operators. The lieutenant watched in disbelief as she connected power cells and antennae from scavenged gear. Within minutes, the device was armed. She flipped a switch and the hum above them faltered, sputtered, and then fell silent. The team exhaled relief, but Dawson only frowned. She said that cutting one signal meant the others would adapt. The drones would reroute and search more aggressively, and that meant they had even less time than she had feared. She told the lieutenant that they had to split into two groups, one to create a diversion and one to reach the control beacon. The lieutenant refused, saying they would move together, but she looked at him coldly and said, if they stayed together, none of them would make it. Through her tone, left no room for debate. Reluctantly, he agreed, and as she prepared to move ahead alone, one of the younger SEALs asked why she was so sure she could make it when. The desert wind tore through the valley, carrying the smell of smoke and cordite across the broken ridges where the SEAL team had been pinned for hours, their ammo low, their nerves stretched tight, and the sun beating down on the steel of their rifles. They had called for evac twice and received nothing but static in return. Now they waited behind shattered rocks, watching the dust trails of an advancing enemy force pushing closer. With every heartbeat, the medic knelt beside a wounded operator, her hands steady, though her pulse raced beneath her calm. She was known only as Dawson to most of them, though no one truly knew her background. The radio crackled with a faint voice, then died again, and the lieutenant cursed under his breath, ordering the team to hold positions while the medic worked. Her kit spread across the dirt, her eyes scanning more than wounds. She was counting angles, distances, the shimmer of scopes in the distance, and when she saw the glint on the ridge, her body went, still for a moment like an animal catching scent. She didn't speak. She just reached for the combat rifle beside her, the one none of the others had seen her fire before they assumed it was for self-defense. Nothing more. The incoming round started. Again, sharp whines cutting the air as bullets chewed the sand inches from their cover. The medic dragged the wounded man behind a slab of stone, then leaned into the open, her eyes narrow, her breath. Even one of the SEALs shouted for her to stay down, but she didn't move instead. She adjusted the scope, checked the wind through the dust, and exhaled slowly, her finger settling on the trigger. The rifle cracked once, echoing across the canyon, and the glint on the ridge disappeared like a snuffed flame. The shooting stopped for a breathless instant as everyone froze, trying to understand what just happened. The lieutenant turned toward her, disbelief written across his face. She was already scanning for the next target, her movements fluid, deliberate, practiced like muscle memory, carved by years of repetition. She wasn't fumbling through instincts. She was executing precision, the kind no medic was supposed to have. The SEALs watched as she shifted her position, crawling low over the rocks, her rifle steady every motion, too confident to be coincidence. Another shot rang out. This one clean through the wind, and another distant threat fell silent. She had just dropped two targets nearly 800 meters out. The valley went eerily still Except for the crackle of small fires and the faint hum of flies, the team stared at her, not moving, not speaking the medic. They thought was just backup, was now their only line holding the enemy at bay. The lieutenant finally asked her where she learned to shoot like that. But she didn't answer. She only adjusted her scope again, whispering something under her breath, too low to hear the way she said it. Sent a chill through him. It wasn't fear. It was focus. The kind that belonged to a hunter. Then the radio came alive again, a voice shouting over static enemy reinforcements incoming from the East Ridge. 2 minutes, the lieutenant barked orders to reposition, but before anyone could move, Dawson was already shifting up the slope. Rifle slung over her shoulder, her pack left behind. She climbed without hesitation. Every step quick and calculated. One of the SEALs called out that she couldn't go alone, but she didn't turn back. She simply said, "Cover the wounded," and vanished. Behind the rocks, her figure merging with the dust and heat. The team scrambled to reload, watching her silhouette disappear. The lieutenant tried to raise her on the comms, but there was nothing. Just silence. Then a single sharp report echoed across. The valley followed by another, and then another, 3 shots clean, evenly spaced like punctuation on an unspoken sentence. Each one followed by the faint collapse of something unseen. The lieutenant's heart pounded as he peered over the ridge, trying to spot her position, but all he saw were the shifting shadows of the canyon. Suddenly movement erupted below the enemy, retreating, scattering, as if something unseen was tearing through them. The SEALs took advantage, firing into the confusion. Regaining ground, the wounded were pulled to safer cover, but through it all, the medic was gone. Her calm, silent, her last position, hidden. The lieutenant called again, her name echoing back. Unanswered, the silence that followed was heavier than the heat itself. Then the radio hissed faintly, and her voice came through soft, measured saying, "Only targets cleared, hold position," before the static swallowed it again. The lieutenant stared at the receiver, unable to tell if she was still alive or already fading into the desert. One of the SEALs whispered that no medic should shoot like that. Another said no sniper moved that quietly. The lieutenant said nothing, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun bled into the sand. He wondered who she really was, and what kind of training could turn a healer into something so precise, so deadly, so silent. The team waited in the shadows as the light began to fade, knowing that somewhere out there she was still watching, still working, and that the night would bring answers. None of them were ready to hear. Night fell over the valley like a curtain of smoke. The stars faint behind the drifting haze of dust and ash. The SEAL team huddled close in the broken terrain, still waiting for word from Dawson. Their medic turned marksman. The lieutenant tried to convince himself she was fine, that she was just moving to a better position. But deep down he knew something about her. Silence felt different, deliberate, as though she had gone beyond their reach, not because she was lost, but because she chose to be. The wounded operator stirred his breath shallow but steady, his arm bandaged tight with gauze that still smelled faintly of antiseptic. Dawson had done it moments before she vanished her gear. Meticulous, her methods calm, the kind of calm only found in someone who had seen too much. One of the SEALs murmured that she didn't act like any medic he'd known. The lieutenant didn't answer. He was still trying to understand the shots she had taken earlier, each one perfect, each one impossible. Given the storm of dust and distance, it was not skill born from training alone. It was instinct guided by something sharper, something hidden. Then a faint signal blinked across the comm board, a pulse pattern like a heartbeat. The lieutenant leaned in, recognizing the frequency but not the origin. It wasn't standard issue, it was encrypted. Someone had changed it, and that someone could only be Dawson. The team fell quiet as the pulse repeated. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. A message none of them understood, but all of them felt in their bones. Whatever she was doing, she was still alive. The lieutenant decided they couldn't wait much longer. Reinforcements would arrive at dawn, and if Dawson was still out there, she'd be caught in the open. He ordered two of the team to move up the slope where she was last seen. The air was thick with tension, the moonlight bending through the dust like fog. The men advanced slowly, rifles ready, ears tuned for the faintest sound, but all they could hear was the soft whisper of the wind brushing against stone until a faint metallic click echoed somewhere above them, a sound they all knew too well, the sound of a safety being disengaged. Before they could react, a voice drifted down low and controlled move no further. It was Dawson, her silhouette barely visible against the ridge. She was kneeling beside a dark shape, her rifle propped beside her when they approached. She didn't look at them. Her eyes fixed on the horizon where small fires still glowed in the distance. She said only that the eastern flank had been neutralized, but the enemy was regrouping and that they needed to prepare for contact within minutes. The lieutenant demanded to know where she'd been, what she'd done, but she just stood up and began loading her weapon with practiced precision. One of the SEALs noticed the blood on her sleeve, not hers but someone else's. She wiped it away with the back of her hand without explanation. The lieutenant tried again, asking her how she could possibly make shots like those earlier in the day, and this time she paused, her voice soft but edged with something cold. She said that some skills aren't learned in the field. They're carried from another life before medicine, before orders, before names. The team exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if she was joking or confessing something. None of them wanted to understand. The silence stretched thin until distant. Gunfire broke it, cutting through the night, sharp and close. Dawson didn't flinch. She was already moving toward higher ground, motioning for the team to follow the lieutenant. Hesitated, but she didn't wait. She was already halfway up the ridge, her movements smooth and silent. The others followed as best they could, but she was faster, lighter, as if she could read the terrain in ways the rest couldn't. They reached a small overlook, and there she dropped to one knee, lining her rifle along the edge without a word. She began calling out distances, directions, corrections, every detail. Exact, her tone was calm, but the way she spoke made it clear she wasn't guessing. She was guiding them through a pattern of engagement the SEALs obeyed, firing where she directed, watching as enemy movement faltered below her. Commands were not shouted. They were whispered, precise, each one like a thread, weaving a trap in the darkness. Within minutes, the fight below turned chaotic. The enemy fire scattered, and then stopped entirely as silence reclaimed the valley again. When the dust settled, the lieutenant looked at her and saw something shift behind her eyes, like the flicker of recognition or memory. She stared out over the quiet valley, her hands steady, but her breathing uneven, as if something deep within her was waking. The lieutenant finally asked what she meant earlier about another life. She didn't answer at first. She only whispered that she once trained others like them, but on the other side of